Everyone, I am Riza Irene Bulalok and I will discuss to you some preliminary questions and pilot work under the Chapter 8 Test Development topic. So, here are some examples of some preliminary questions. So, first question is, what is the test designed to measure? So this is a deceptively simple question. Its answer is closely linked to how the test developer defines the construct being measured and how that definition is the same as or different from other tests purporting to measure the same construct. Next is, what is the objective of the test? So in the service of what goal will the test be employed? Or in what ways is the objective of this test the same or different from the other tests with similar goals? So what real world behaviors would be anticipated to correlate with test taker responses? So for the next question, is there a need for this test? So this question answers the questions that are there any other tests purporting to measure the same thing? In what ways will that new test be better than or different from the existing ones? So will there be more compelling evidence for its reliability or validity? Will it be more comprehensive? Will it take less time to administer? And in what ways would this test not be better than the existing tests? So here, you have to consider these following questions when you are about to develop a new test. So next questions is, who will use this test? So sino ang gagamit ng mga test na ito? So will it be the clinicians, educators, others? And for what purpose or purposes would this test be used? So next is, who will take this test? So this question will answer kung sino yung magagamit ng test, sino mag-take ng test. And sino yung mga desirable or karapat-dapat na mag-take ng test na ito at for what age range the test taker is test designed, kung ano yung age bracket ng test na kung saan, ay ng mga test takers na kung saan pwede mag-take ng test na ito, and what reading level is required of the test takers. Dapat yung test taker ba is marunong magbasa and hanggang anong level, and what cultural factors might affect test takers' response. So ano yung mga factors na pwedeng maka-affect sa mga sagot, possible na sagot ng test taker regarding sa test na gagawin. And next, what content will the test cover? So this will answer why should it cover this content. So bakit need i-cover up or bakit ganito yung coverage ng test na ito? Is this coverage different from the content coverage of existing tests with the same or similar objective? So dito is sasagutin ito na yung coverage ba ng test na gagawin mo is different sa mga test na nag-i-exist na, and how and why is the content area different? So ano yung naiiba and bakit iba yung content or area na sakop ng test na gagawin? And to what extent is this content culture specific? So next, how will the test be administered? So is it amenable to both group and individual administration? So ano ba ang pagkandak ba ng test na ito? Is pwede ba na by group ang pagsagot or individual? What differences will exist between individual and group administrators of this test? So ano yung posibleng pagkakaiba kung bakit yung test na ito ay sasagutan individually or yung test na ito is sasagutan by group? And will the test be designed for or amenable to computer administration? So pwede ba ito na through computer lang ipatake, or through Google Forms or through any electronic devices? And how might differences between versions of the test be reflected in the test scores? Next. So, what is the ideal format of the test? So, ano yung format ng test na gagawin mo? True or false ba? Essay, multiple choice, or ibang format? And Bakit mo napili and why did you decide to select this kind of format? Next question is, should more than one form of test be developed? So, on the basis of a cost-benefit analysis, should alternate or parallel forms of test be created? So, on the basis daw of cost-benefit, ano ba, ang ma-develop pa na test is it should be alternate or parallel or paano siya i-conduct, and what special training will be required of test users for administering or interpreting the test. So ano ba yung mga required na trainings or kakayahan ng isang mag-administer ng test na gagawin mo, and ano yung mga background qualifications niya or background qualification ng mga prospective user of the data na manggagaling mula sa test na ikakandak or i-administer, and what restrictions, if any, should be placed on distributors of the test and on the test's usage. So, ano lang yung sakop or hanggang saan lang or kung sino lang ang pwede na mag-distribute ng mga test na gagawin mo. And next question is, what types of responses will be required of test takers? So, ano yung mga responses? For example, if ang tao is visually impaired, so ano yung responses na required na makuha mula sa mga test takers? So, what kind of disability might preclude someone from being able to take this test, and what adaptations or accommodations are recommended for persons with disabilities? Next questions, who benefits from an administration of this test? So, sinong magbe-benefit after na ma-administer ang test na ito? Ano yung mali-learn ng mga test takers? Like, what would the test takers learn? Or, paano ba makaka-benefit? How would the test takers benefit from the administration of this test? What would they gain from answering this test? And what would the test user learn? Or how might the test user benefit? And what social benefit, if any, derives from an administration of this test? So yun na nga, ano yung mga benefits na maaring makuha ng isang test taker if mag-take sila ng ganitong test? Next, is there any potential harm as the result of an administration of this test? So meron bang mga potential risks na maaring ma-induce within the participants or within the setting na paggaganapan ng pag-administer ng test? So what are the safeguards? What safeguards are built into the recommended testing procedure to prevent any sort of harm to any of the parties involved in the use of test? So ano yung mga safety precautions na gagawin upang like to ensure that the safety of the test takers and the test administrators? And the last questions is, how will meaning be attributed to scores on this test? So, this will answer the question whether will a test taker's score be compared to those of others taking the test at the same time to those of the others in a criterion group, or will the test evaluate mastery of a particular content area? So, these last questions provides a point of departure for elaborating on issues related to test development with regard to norm versus criterion reference test. So I will discuss that in the next slide. So we have here the norm reference versus criterion reference tests, item development issues. So norm reference achievement test. Norm reference measures compare a person's knowledge or skills to the knowledge or skills of the norm group. So it is also called a standardized test and is designed to rank and compare students with one another. As we have already mentioned, these tests determine whether a particular student performs better than an average student. So after the items on a norm reference test are scored, the scores are compared to those of a comparison group or norming group. Because the test taker is compared to other people, the results can be considered subjective. So, and then to develop a norm reference test, the test developers select a statistically relevant group of individuals and administer the test items. The scores of this norming group are used to create the scoring system for the test. Then, The composition of the norming group depends on the test, but factors considered usually include age or grade level and may also be narrowed down by other demographic information. In addition, some tests are normed for more than one group. If so, a test administrator gives the test, then chooses the correct scoring system based on the subject's qualifications. In other words, the administrator uses a different scoring chart for a 7-year-old than for a 12-year-old. The norm reference test definition indicates that the results are reported as a percentage or a percentile ranking. The purpose of this number is to tell the test taker what percentage of the norming group scored above and below them. Many test developers use a bell curve to organize their data. This means that they expect the largest percentage of test takers to score in the middle range of the test, with smaller numbers of test takers performing below average and above average. So let's proceed to the criterion-oriented test. So criterion reference test or criterion-oriented test compare a person's knowledge or skills against a predetermined standard, learning goal, performance level, or other criterion. So if you've ever been to a carnival or amusement park, think about the signs that read, "You must be this tall to ride this ride," with an arrow pointing to a specific line on a height chart. So the line indicated by the arrow function as the criterion. The ride operator compares each person's height against it before allowing them to get on the ride. Note that it doesn't matter how many people are in line or how tall or short they are. Whether or not you're allowed to get on the ride is determined solely by your height. So even if you're the tallest person in line, if the top of your head doesn't reach the line on the height chart, you can't ride. So these criterion reference tests and assessment are commonly employed in licensing context, be it a license to practice medicine or to drive a car. Criterion reference approaches are also employed in educational contexts in which mastery of particular material must be demonstrated before the student moves on to advanced material that conceptually builds on the existing base of knowledge, skills, or both. So, the development of this criterion-oriented test or criterion reference instruments is derived from a conceptualization of the knowledge or skills to be mastered. So, ideally, each item on a criterion-oriented test addresses the issue of whether the test taker, would be a physician, engineer, piano student, or whoever, has met certain criteria. In short, when it comes to criterion-oriented assessment, being first in the class does not count and is often irrelevant. Although we can envision exceptions to this general rule, norm reference comparisons are typically insufficient and inappropriate when knowledge of mastery is what the test user requires. So, it doesn't matter pagdating sa criterion-oriented test, it doesn't matter whether all candidates pass or only a few candidates pass. The cut score is the cut score. So let's take for example the licensure examination for teacher. It doesn't matter whether gaano karami yung nakapasa, basta ang cut score is cut score. Halimbawa, for you to be a licensed teacher, you have to reach the average score of 75%. So whether or not there is only 2 people who have reached the 75%, it doesn't matter. 75% is 75%, and that is the cut score. So next is the pilot work, also called as pilot study and pilot research. It is the preliminary research surrounding the creation of a prototype of the test. Test items may be studied or piloted to evaluate whether they should be included in the final form of the instrument. The test developer typically attempts to determine how best to measure a targeted construct. Pilot work is a necessity when constructing tests or other measuring instruments for publication and wide distribution. So in pilot work, the test developer typically attempts to determine how best to measure a targeted construct. The process may entail literature review and experimentation, as well as the creation, revision, and deletion of preliminary test items. After pilot work comes the process of test construction. Keep in mind, however, that depending on the nature of the test as well as of the nature of the changing responses to it by test takers, test users, and the community at large, the need for further pilot research and test revision is always a possibility. So, in pilot testing, a small-scale study conducted prior to conducting an actual experiment. So that is pilot testing. So examples of it are checking to see, first, checking to see if the design tool works. Second, asking people to complete a survey to find out whether a question results in the requested information. 3, testing the intervention with 4 people before trying it with 60 people. 4, asking people to complete your survey and then revising the questions based on their responses. 5th, revising the study after analyzing preliminary data and determining that the data do not address the research questions. 6, student researcher designs questionnaire for your study's target population. Asks the population to try out the questionnaire, and the questions are revised based on the responses. So let's take here a scenario. A researcher planning to conduct interviews regarding landowner perspectives of land use regulations conducts 5 interviews with 5 people to test the questions and see if they get answers that make sense. So the researchers may revise their interview later on based on the initial data collected. So that is how pilot testing or pilot study works. So that would be the end of my report. Thank you so much for listening.